Welcome to Wellspring on the Air. I'm Nicole Alfonso, a therapist at Wellspring and the host of today's show about how to relieve stress. With me today to discuss this interesting topic is Juliet Peterkin. Together, we want to tell you about what stress looks like in our lives and how we can manage it. So stay with us. We've got some important information coming your way. Welcome, Juliet, to the show. Thank you for being here, for choosing this important topic. I think it's very relevant in all of our lives at some point or another. So I do want you to take just a few seconds just to introduce yourself and tell people listening who you are.
Thank you for inviting me, Nicole, to this program. I think it is very, very powerful to be able to talk about stress. My name is Juliet Peterkin. I work at Wellspring as a therapist, and I've been practicing mental health counseling for over about 8 years or so. And I really look forward to sharing today the challenges that we have when it comes to stress. Really look forward to it.
Thank you, Juliet. And let's dive right in and talk about what is the actual definition of stress.
When I think about stress, especially today, I just think of it like the common cold. Everyone is susceptible to it, whether you're a child, adult, whatever walk of life you are going to experience stress. Stress is defined as any type of change that causes physical, emotional, or psychological strain. Stress is also the body's response to anything that requires attention or action. We all experience stress to some degree or the other. Stress can be observable, and the way we can observe stress is changes in behavior. For example, feeling sadness, frustration, withdrawing from in a social aspect, withdrawing from family, from friends, from social activities. It can also be shown in anger or angry outbursts, insomnia, alcohol or drug use. These are some of the ways that stress is observable.
Yeah, so you mentioned stress is the body's response to anything that requires attention or action, which I think is really an important point for people to listen to, because we do store stress in our bodies. Like, we store emotions in our body. We store things that happen to us there. And so when our body is telling us something, it's kind of like, hey, I'm here. You need to pay attention, right? You need to do something about
this. Definitely. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions that we have also is that stress can be very seen in a physical way. I think a lot of times we look for stress as something mental, like not being able to function, but it could also result in physical things that are happening, stomach aches or all headaches. Different type of things, headaches, exactly.
Yes.
So definitely.
Okay, so let's talk about the 3 types of stress.
Okay, so we have one type of stress is acute stress. Now, acute stress is an intense, unpleasant, dysfunctional reaction, and it actually begins shortly after an overwhelming traumatic experience, and it lasts for less than a month. So, for example, acute stress could be a motor vehicle accident that totaled your car. It was so traumatic and you got a near-death experience. So that could be an example of acute stress. And the experiences of it can last anywhere between the time of the event until within less than a month that you'll experience that. Mostly you could relate acute stress to a post-traumatic stress disorder. Another form of stress is episodic acute stress. Now, this happens when someone gets frequent bouts of acute stress. So, for example, you have some persons, like if you're a business, say you're a business owner, and there's so many things going on at one time. You're trying to do too many things at one time. So instead of hiring someone to come on board to help you with the business, you take on all the tasks, and this could be an example of what you would look at when it calls episodic acute stress. Then we have another form of stress, it's chronic stress. And chronic stress is consistent with feelings of pressure and feeling overwhelmed over a long period of time. So for example, chronic stress could be insomnia, not being able to sleep. I know one of the things when we think about the pandemic and all the distresses that it caused, and just staying up trying to figure out what are you going to do about the children, what are you going to do about your finances, and so this becomes a chronic state, and it lasts for a long period of time.
Yeah, we've been in a pandemic for 2
Oh,
years.
2 years.
So chronic stress for a lot of people for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then stress can also be a result of trauma, right, in our lives. You mentioned acute stress from an accident. But if somebody has a history of maybe sexual or physical or emotional abuse that they have been exposed to consistently or even at one time, this can also be a source of stress, chronic stress, if you don't address the trauma, right?
Exactly. And I like how you brought up especially sexual abuse. We could find that a lot of people, there's some people that experience sexual abuse from childhood. And this now, they find out now that they're an adult, they're experiencing certain types of reaction to it, probably just getting angry all the time, or even behavior, just some type of behaviors that is not healthy, taking drugs and alcohol, even though it happened a long time ago, but it starts manifesting itself later on. And this could be a result of what we are called a trauma that happens, a traumatic event that happened earlier in life, that could result in distress as an adult. And the person could look around and said, well, their health is good, the family is good, and so many things are good. Why am I feeling this way? Why is this thing happening to me? Not realizing that this is a result of something that had happened earlier in their childhood.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, and then of course the small traumas and big traumas, right? We call them
Yes.
the little T's
Little
and
T,
the
the big T's. Yeah, I think that's pretty interesting, the little T's and the big T's. Well, we could look at the little T as something like depression, for example, anxieties. Um, these are things that, for example, a job loss right now could be a little T, because during the time of looking for work and not having the income to supply to take care of the family, it could create some kind of depression and anxiety. But it's not so overwhelming that it literally takes over your life. While you look at the big T, and you're looking at more like what we just talked about, like sexual violence, serious injury, life-threatening circumstances. Sometimes we have serious injury that causes um, so much medical conditions, so many medications, pain medications that cause side effects, and then not being able to deal with the side effects of it. So many of these things are can cause, so many times injuries, I should say, can cause so much distress, where we look at this big T and it becomes also life-threatening. People become suicidal. Sometimes we think suicidal persons are dealing with just something mental, but sometimes it's physical ailment that lead a person to suicide,
yeah,
based on what is going on at the time. Yeah. So
yeah.
those are two examples of the little T's and the big T's of the
And I think
traumatic
it's
events. Mhm.
important to say that it really doesn't, if it's a little T or a big T, whatever the response is for you is what's important, right? So a
Exactly.
little T may give you a
Can feel
very
like a big
stressful
T.
response. Yes, it could feel
Yes,
like a
can
big
feel like a
T.
big T.
Right. And so
Yeah.
being aware of that,
Yes.
it's really how you respond to it personally.
Definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. That was a great point, Nicole. Great
Yeah.
point.
So what are some of today's stressors? Of course, keeping in mind we're in a post COVID-19, crossing fingers about that situation right now.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you say post-COVID, because I mean, just interacting with people as you go out, even though it's post-COVID, for some people, their reaction to it is like it's still current. Even the apprehensions and the fears that they have, it's so tangible. Like you could literally see that they're like currently experiencing it, even though it has passed and we have moved through so many different phases of it, especially here in Florida. But some of the stressors could be financial. For example, there's a lot of investment opportunities that people lost, especially when the pandemic just started and so many things were shut down. People didn't know what was going to happen. People pulling their money from here. So many things went down. So then we had a whole period of time where we were home. Some people lost income there. Some companies shut down. So many places went out of business. So I think the financial aspect of stress, as far as the COVID-19 is concerned, I think was one of the strongest aspect of the distress that came about with the post-traumatic with COVID.
And even now recovering from that, if you put more on credit cards or that takes a time now moving forward to recover from that. Yeah.
Another thing that I believe also impacted our society is homelessness. People lost their homes. I know sometimes you'll find some places that you'll see people living out of their cars right now.
Yeah.
Because of the impact of the pandemic. If you think about also social media, social media has gotten to the place where so many people has moved over to, I remember when we were locked down, that's where we were finding entertainment. That's where we were finding so many things to do. And so there's some people gravitated to that as far as experiencing their joy and their fulfillment. And so because when you become dependent on something like that, then moving back now into society is like, how do you transition now back into society? So that I think took over so much of our lives, the social media. The negative impact also of social media is the things that you see that are wrong. The impact of the virus, the economy falling apart, this going wrong here, that going wrong, and everything now is, you could find anything that you want to find out now on social media. So if we were in a pandemic and the pandemic affect the whole world, not just America, the whole world, and social media is bringing all of this into our home because now it's our entertainment, now is where we're looking for information, then it's going to impact us all in a negative way. The negative parts of the social media that we're receiving. Our education system, our children, oh my God, the challenges, having parents who are so challenged with the transition of helping their children to use a computer and following the lessons from home. And then there's the transition with our children being able to learn in that environment at home, because for our children, home is home. It's not school, you know. And then the grades and trying to get back now, as you say, Nicole, this is now post, and trying now to get back into operating normally, back into being in school. And so it's so challenging now to keep the children focused and be able to get the work done where their academics could go up or be what it's supposed to be. So I think it still is very, very challenging when it comes to education, when it comes to the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. What about our relationships? Challenges with that. I know for married couples, when it comes to the finances, that's a big challenge, and that impacted almost most families when it came to the pandemic. So there you now have relationship challenges. Another thing that also happened too during the pandemic is that some spouses were forced to stay home with the other one. And sometimes those relationships we're so used to this one's been gone, that one's been one coming, one going. So they didn't even really have that time together where they had a healthy relationship together. So now they have to try to build a healthy relationship. And sometimes it's challenging because it was never there in the first place. So
Yeah.
I think mostly I would think that was mostly impacted relationships when it comes to the COVID-19 is, I think marriage was mostly impacted
Mm,
by that.
yeah.
Broken homes,
Hmm.
not being able, then we have relationships because sometimes we weren't able to visit families. Then you had a division like who could come from, who can't come, who's got vaccinated, who's not vaccinated. Um, who could visit the elderly, then being able to make sure that your parents are okay. And it is so there's so much distress within the family
Yes.
unit when it came to the impact of the virus itself.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Juliet. So we're going to take a short break to thank one of our sponsors who makes the production of our podcast possible. When we come back, we'll hear more from Juliet about stress. Welcome back to Wellspring on the Air. This is Nicole Alfonso. If you're just joining our show, our topic today is how to relieve stress. So far today, we've talked about what is stress and what it presents like in our lives after COVID. So if you joined us late, you can find us on our favorite podcast channel on Wellspring on the Air or on our website blog page at wellspringmiami.org. Just search for this topic. We were just discussing some of the stressors, keeping in mind that we're in a COVID-19 or post-COVID-19 era. And we were talking about how marriages were being very affected. I think there's a lot of divorce that came out of the pandemic. But there's also the increase of mental illness. And I can personally speak to this in the teenagers, right? So
Yes.
Juliet, tell us about this because we have seen, of course, here at Wellspring, we have gotten a lot of calls just because people are really struggling on the mental health side.
Yes, totally agree, especially with our teenagers. There's been such an increase in suicides among our teenagers or even young children, not being able to deal with the distresses that came. Because I think some of the times we take it for granted how our children take on changes, and
Mm,
especially when there's life-threatening situations. Because if virus came on like a life-threatening situation and people were dying left, right, and center. So for our children, especially our teenagers that's going through that transition phase, they could take it really, really bad. It could really go left for them. Depression could lead to all different types of thoughts, suicidal thoughts. And I think also the future, thinking about what the future would look like for them could be something. Then you have friends, and then because this social media thing, social media challenges that are going on, how many likes and how many this not likes, and then all the different things that goes with that. Um, so for the children, it's not, then you have adults that had had the challenges with their finances or marriage or just transition into society, dealing with the fears and things like that. So a lot of people became so distressed mentally, and this stress came over into a lot of people experiencing panic attacks,
mhm.
um, serious depression, insomnia, all different types of things start coming out where they need the help now of a mental health professional to help to just to get back to some kind of um, healthy way of thinking, I
Yeah.
would say, or dealing with the situation, dealing with the challenges that have come about.
I think the isolation was a really big deal for a lot of people because we are meant to be social, right? We're meant to be in community and engage with others. And that was very cut off, for a lot of people. And even now, there's still people that are not comfortable fully being in spaces where there's a lot of people and engaging in social circumstances. So I think that is a big deal. Thankfully, things are getting back to some sort of normalcy with that. And we have been able to adjust using Zoom as a way, of course, of engaging and connecting. But I think that was also a big piece on the mental illness part.
Totally agree. Totally agree, Nicole, because like you said, we're meant for relationships and we're meant to touch even in the mental health field, having to be able to use telehealth to speak to our client. It's effective to a certain level because there's still that lack of touch. There's still that lack of presence, that can make that therapeutic session so much more productive.
Yeah, so why don't we dive into the practical piece here about what are ways that we can cope with these stresses that we mentioned? It's a lot. Not everybody's experiencing those, but there are ways that we can be resilient, right? And work through the stress. So let's talk about that.
Most important when it comes to dealing with stress, it is critical to have a good support system. Now, that support system looks different for everybody. For example, some people, their support system might be the church family, right? For another person, it might be family members, For some people, it might be friends. For some people, it might be organizations being able to get in contact with, for example, Wellspring, to deal with, to help them develop some kind of healthy way to navigate through the challenges that they're facing at this time. So the support system is critical. It is very, very important that the person that is experiencing stress is able to have some form of support system, whatever that looks like for that person. Important, be able to identify what is the stressful situation. Because I think I heard Nicole mention it earlier. It could be, people could be experiencing stress, but don't identify it as stress. So you have to be able to identify that there is a stressful situation happening. So good ways to identify a stressful situation is to look at your behavior. How are you feeling? Is there some discomfort going on? Are you eating properly? Are you getting angry easily? Are you not able to sleep properly? Things like that. So be able to, or sometimes even your friends will tell you, or family will tell you, something's going on with you. What's going on? You're different. You're getting angry quick, or your husband or wife will tell you, what's going on there? Something's going on here. So there's different ways to be able to identify that you are experiencing stress, even outside of yourself. Just someone coming and saying to you, you're reacting to this thing, way too, or even sleeping for long periods of time, what normally sleep, just wanting to stay home, or wanting to avoid, like we talk about isolation, wanting to avoid, being in the social aspect, or even wanting to be around, avoid family members or friends, or not wanting to go to work, things like that. There's so many ways that we could identify that stress is happening at the time you're experiencing stress. Now, once you identify it, now we must develop now the coping skill. How am I going to maneuver? How am I going to get to a healthy place? We have therapeutic interventions for places like Wellspring or other places. You have your church, religious affiliations. Sometimes those are helpful, family members, things like that. So be able to find a way to develop, to find the intervention, some help. Then now we have to know, what is it? How are we going to get to a place of health, being able to practice self-care, right?
Yes.
Avoid the situations that can create the stress, induce the stress, and prolong the stress. Okay, so we want to avoid those.
And some of the things that I think of, like when we're thinking of coping skills for stress, I think exercise is proven to be one of the really good ones to be able to release, right? And kind of let go of some stress. Some people are, need to talk it out, right? So I need a place or a person, a confidant that I can say, this is happening. And as you speak it, you can find solutions to it, or you can find, ways to handle it. Right? Fun activities, hobbies, breaks, are you working so much that you don't have a break to breathe, that you don't have the space to just be in touch with yourself? So, what's your rhythm? Is your rhythm too quick? Is it too fast? Do you need to stop? Do you have to, can you do some fun activities, or are you always just go, 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 no space to breathe, no space to connect with your kids, with your wife and husband? I mean, you really have to look at these things, stop and say, okay, what can I do to maybe disconnect a little bit? Maybe you have a hobby, or create a hobby that you can have that space for yourself, so that you can have a break from what is causing you stress, right?
Yes,
stress
definitely.
only leads to more stress, and then to disaster, or dysfunctional coping skills, which are, the drinking, the spending, the whatever, numbing way you find. So it's really important to find good coping skills that work for you, right?
Exactly.
Some people clean because that's how they cope. Okay, if it works for you and it's helpful, great, but finding those coping skills,
Awesome. I like that. I also wanted to give an example. For example, if you have a medical condition, right? And you go to the doctor and they says, okay, this is what's going on with you. You need to follow up with these tests. And so for some people, they're like, well, I'm not going to follow up with the test because I don't think I need it. I think I'm fine. And they decide to make their own self-diagnosis. Then by not following up with the doctor, the help is not going to come. The distress is not going to go away. And sometimes we're thinking so much that we have the control enough to maintain and to work, so you have the brain power, so we won't get the help that we need because we're thinking within ourselves. We have the answers, but if we have the answers, we wouldn't be stressed.
Yes.
So it's important, like Nicole is saying, to make sure you're doing the things to keep you healthy, the exercise, just do something fun. Sometimes people feel like they can't do something fun. They feel guilty or whatever. Just do something fun,
Yeah. And so there's things we can control, and there's things we can't control, right?
Yes, exactly. So let's talk about the controllable and the uncontrollable. So let's go back to, let's talk about COVID-19, for example. For example, you have reduced income, right? So a controllable would be like, you're able to now, say, for example, if we used to eat out 5 times out of the week, then you could eat out 1 time out of the week or 2 times out of the week, and now eat more at home. So you would cut back on the finances, reduce the stress. That's a controllable, right? So uncontrollable would be, for example, you'll have these laws that pass, the mandates. They tell you that you have to stay 6 feet. We talk about isolation, not being able to bond with people or relational, the touchy-feely thing. You have to stay 6 feet. You have things like testing, going to get tested. All of those things, the mandates and the laws and the things that are governing our lives, these are not controllables. These are uncontrollables. We can't, but they can create stress for us. For example, for some people do not want to get vaccinated. And then they have to find an income from an employer that will allow them to work without being vaccinated. That's a distress on that person right there. That's stress, I should say, on a person right there. And it's an uncontrollable situation because the person they're employed, they can't control their employer and tell their employer to change the law and make it so that they could come in and work without being vaccinated. So that's those things are uncontrollable, but they can create stress.
Yeah. Okay, so how do we as believers cope with stress, right? We're human, and we are, experience this all the time. Some of us can manage it better than others, but we are going to experience stress. So how do we set our minds correctly to handle this?
I think first and foremost, Nicole, as believers, it is not a sin if we are experiencing stress. I'm not talking about how we handle the stress, but if we are experiencing stress, because I think one of the first things as believers, we'll deny that there's something stressful going on with us, or something is out of our control, or we can't manage, or something that is causing us to have a negative behavior. Okay, we'll find so many other things to put a label on it, but we won't look at it as we're experiencing stress. You know, but
So
in
face the
Matthew
truth
6,
about that, right? That's
exactly,
kind of what you're saying. Let's be truthful with ourselves about what's happening.
exactly. Be honest. Exactly. Be truthful. Be honest. But there's a I think it's part of our assessment, one of our assessment packets, and it says, how emotionally honest are we before God? You know, and I just remember that when you said that about being truthful. Anyway, Matthew 6:34 says, therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. That's Matthew 6:34. The source of our peace, all of our peace, comes from God. And it is our portion as believers to accept that it is God's provision for his children that we experience peace. The children, as children of God, we are able to access his peace. So when we're experiencing the stresses that we talked about earlier, depression, anxieties, fears, financial challenges with our children, with the education system, with the laws, all of these things, they create worry. And it is not unusual for us to worry about our children, their future. It's not unusual for us to worry about what's going to happen in our homes with our finances. But the scripture tells us that don't keep this worry. Don't take it on where it becomes distressing to you. Because remember, be reminded that your Father, the God that creates each and every one of us, he has provision for us. But and do keep in mind that each day has a certain amount of trouble that will come with it. So if we start being reminded of his provisions and accept his provisions, then even though we have troubles in the day, we could move through the day because our faith rises and we have hope that even though today is difficult, the God that I love, that I serve, has made a way for me to move through this day.
Yes, yes, I love that. I think that's a great place, Juliet, to close out. It is actually time to close out the show. Thank you, Juliet, for joining us today and shedding light on the topic of stress and how we can manage it in our lives. We hope you learned insights about this. And thank you for joining our show today. Again, if you joined this program midstream, you can find this show and others on podcast at Wellspring on the Air or on our blog and on wellspringmiami.org. The title of today's show again was How to Relieve Stress. Encourage us and let us know you're listening by sending comments or questions to ontheair@wellspringmiami.org. It's time to wrap up. This is Nicole Alfonso with Wellspring on the Air, because hearts and minds matter.